Some stories don't begin with a crash, they begin with silence. A chair moved without a word. A sigh no one hears. A man once praised as the picture of success quietly vanishing from his own life. My name is Thomas Lee. I used to think I had it all, a brilliant wife, a beautiful home, a thriving career. But sometimes, loss doesn't come from tragedy. It comes from all the times you stay quiet to keep the peace. This isn't a love story. This is the journey of a man reclaiming his voice in a world that preferred him silent. By the time I turned 35, I was the founder of a growing tech company, the kind of name you hear casually mentioned in Forbes lists and closed-door pitch meetings. My face had been on stages in Berlin, Tokyo, Singapore. I had built something real, something of my own. And yet, in the house I came home to every night, I wasn't a man. I was a placeholder, a name on the mailbox, a moving part in someone else's machinery. When I met Emily, I thought I had found peace. She was warm, articulate, and magnetic in a way that didn't beg for attention. She simply was the center of it. I fell fast. Fast enough to overlook the red flags dressed as tradition. I mistook her closeness with her mother as loyalty, not dependency. I took her softness for openness, not absence of confrontation. I thought love meant adjusting. I didn't know how far adjustments could go before you become unrecognizable to yourself. After we got married, I moved in with her family. Not because I needed to, but because she insisted we'd save time and money while we hunted for our real place. That hunt never happened. Instead, I was inserted into an already formed ecosystem, orbiting around the gravitational pull of one woman, Helen, my mother-in-law. Helen ran the house like a silent empire. Everything looked perfect on the surface. The fresh lilies on the granite kitchen island, the imported wine collection, the morning yoga chants echoing faintly from the living room speakers. But underneath the curated elegance was a cold, methodical control that ran through every decision. She didn't yell, she didn't threaten, she simply expected. And when those expectations weren't met, she didn't punish, she withdrew, which somehow felt worse. At first, it was small things, folding laundry her way, cooking meals she approved of. Then came the chore lists, then the suggestions about how I could use my time better when working from home gardening, fixing the shutters, organizing the pantry by date. Emily would smile and say, "She means well," like it was a fact. I told myself to be gracious. I told myself this was temporary, but the truth was I was slowly being absorbed. And Emily, she wasn't a partner in it, she was part of the mechanism. She deferred to Helen on everything, how we celebrated holidays, where we vacationed, what color sheets we bought for the guest room. When I tried to bring it up, she'd look at me like I'd just said something offensive. "You know how much she's sacrificed for us. Can't you just be a little more patient?" Patient. That word lived in our house like furniture. I heard it more than I heard my name. Still, I tried. I kept my head down. I poured everything into my company during the day and came home to my checklist at night. I told myself I was being mature, supportive, but at some point, maturity starts to feel like self-abandonment, and support turns into silence. I became mute in my own marriage. Every time I opened my mouth to challenge something, why we hadn't moved out yet, why I had to explain every late night at work, why I wasn't allowed to say no to dinner parties, I saw that flicker in Emily's eyes. Disappointment, like I was failing an invisible exam she and her mother had written. The breaking point didn't come with a fight, it came with a whisper. I came home a day early from a business trip. The house was quiet, but I heard voices in the dining room. I shouldn't have listened, but I did. And what I heard, I can't unhear. "She needs to push him to quit that tech job," Helen said. Her voice was low but sharp, the kind of tone that cuts through doors. "He's wasting time. If he really cared about this family, he'd be home. Focused on being useful, not chasing stock charts." "He won't listen to me," Emily answered. "He keeps saying I don't understand his vision." "Then you make him understand, or this marriage won't last." I froze. It wasn't anger that hit me first, it was humiliation. The quiet kind, the one that creeps in when you realize you're being discussed like a stubborn appliance. I wasn't a partner. I was a problem to be solved, a variable to control. That night, I didn't bring it up. I couldn't. I stared at my plate while they laughed over dinner, talking about some influencer's new skincare line like nothing was wrong. I felt like I was watching a play I wasn't cast in anymore. The next day, I asked Emily directly, "Do you want me to leave the company?" She didn't flinch. "It's not about what I want. It's about what's best for us. You work all the time, Thomas. You're never here." "I'm building something that matters. To you," she said. "But what about this family?" That word again. Family. I used to think it meant home. Now it felt like a prison with velvet curtains. I wanted to scream, "What about me?" But I didn't. I just stood there staring at a woman who once held my hand like it was something sacred, now looking at me like I was a liability. 3 weeks later, I moved out. I didn't take much. Just 2 suitcases, one with clothes, the other with hard drives and a few photographs I hadn't looked at in months. I found a small apartment near the office. The walls were bare, the windows dusty, the floor creaked when I walked. But it was mine. And for the first time in years, I could breathe. No more notes on the fridge, no more passive-aggressive reminders about dishes, no more pretending to enjoy conversations that felt like performance art. Just silence. Heavy, but honest. I threw myself into work not to escape, but to remember. To remember what I was before I let myself be whittled down by love, loyalty, and fear. My startup became my compass again. Every deal closed, every pitch won, every small victory felt like oxygen. And that's when I met Laura. I remember the first time I saw her. It was in Singapore, the kind of tech conference where everyone pretends to be more relaxed than they are, sipping espresso shots while sizing each other up in branded lanyards. I had just finished a panel about scaling product teams in high-growth environments and stepped out into the hallway, mentally reworking one of my answers when she walked past me, Emily. She wasn't trying to be noticed. That's what made her noticeable. Her laugh was unforced, eyes focused, no unnecessary movements. There was no calculated air about her, and in a room full of tech egos and over-polished sincerity, that felt like a damn miracle. We struck up a conversation by the coffee stand, completely mundane. Something about how awful the pastries were, but there was a kind of rhythm in how she responded that made me stay. Her words had weight, but she didn't use them like weapons. She listened before speaking. She asked questions without making them feel like tests. I had no idea at the time that this ordinary exchange would grow into the most extraordinary mistake of my life. We talked for hours that evening, missed our next sessions, skipped the startup mixers. Everything about her felt grounded. She said she was an interior design creative, detail-oriented, but not drowning in it. Said her mother was a strong figure in her life, and I thought nothing of it then. She asked me what it felt like to build something from scratch and actually watch it grow. I remember pausing, caught off guard not by the question, but by the way she looked at me after she asked it, like she really gave a damn about the answer. I told her it felt like standing in a storm you created and realizing you have to either ride it or drown in it. She didn't flinch, she just nodded and said, "I like storms." Fast forward 6 months, we were inseparable. She visited my offices in San Francisco, stayed up late talking business models and burnout with me like she belonged in my world. I visited hers in LA, met her younger brother, heard about her dad who had passed away when she was 16. It made sense, I thought, the tight bond with her mom. They'd survived something together. That kind of loyalty I respected. I didn't see the red flag waving right in my face. I saw love, compatibility, a mirror I wanted to keep looking into. We got married the following year. It was fast, I know. But when you're running at full speed professionally, your personal life often mirrors the momentum. There's no time to second guess when everything is moving. Emily moved in with me briefly in San Francisco, but she never really settled. She said the city felt too cold, that she missed the familiarity of LA. I had just closed a major Series B round and my board was pressuring me to find more balance anyway. When Emily suggested we stay with her family temporarily while looking for a place, it didn't sound unreasonable. "Just a few months," she said, "until we find something that feels like us." I didn't realize then that us was a moving target I would never quite hit. The house was stunning modern, open concept, with skylights in the hallway and imported marble floors. Her mother, Helen, greeted me with the kind of smile you reserve for business associates, polite, perfectly measured, and ultimately void of warmth. She wore control like perfume. Not overpowering, but always present. The first night she made dinner rosemary lamb with a side of questions. What were my long-term plans? Did I think the tech bubble was close to bursting? Did I believe in prenups? She asked these things with a smile, like a game show host masking the blade behind every word. Still, I chalked it up to overprotectiveness. Maybe she just needed time. After all, I wasn't just some guy dating her daughter. I was a partner, a founder, someone who could easily be mistaken for a risk. I convinced myself she'd come around. She didn't. Living in that house was like stepping into someone else's life. Every room had been curated by Helen, every detail approved. She had systems morning routines, chore rotations, weekly household feedback sessions disguised as brunch. At first, it was amusing. Then it became exhausting. She began leaving me lists: clean the garage, organize the attic, fix the irrigation system, even though I'd never touched a sprinkler system in my life. When I pushed back, she said it was about family contribution. Emily would giggle and say, "Mom just likes things neat." But she never questioned the list. Never once asked if I was okay with it. She had slipped into compliance so smoothly, I didn't even see the slide. I told myself I was being sensitive, that I'd been working too hard and needed to adjust to living in someone else's space. But that wasn't the truth. The truth was, I was being replaced in my own narrative. My time wasn't mine. My space wasn't mine. My voice wasn't heard. I had willingly walked into someone else's kingdom and handed over the crown. I started spending more time at the office. My startup was my only sanctuary. I was building something real, something I could control, something that didn't involve second-guessing every word, every sigh, every silence. Emily began calling me distant. I said I was tired. She said I didn't understand what she and her mother had sacrificed to let me into their world. Let me in. That phrase stuck with me, as if I were a guest, a visitor who needed constant reminding of how fortunate I was to be tolerated. The more I tried to reestablish boundaries, the more I became the problem. I wasn't patient enough. I wasn't grateful enough. I wasn't supportive. I stopped arguing, not out of weakness, but because I couldn't afford to waste energy on a war where the rules changed daily and the judges were always related. Looking back now, I see how quickly I let my own lines blur. I was so eager to belong, I didn't realize I was giving up ownership of my own life. There's a name for that kind of love. It's not love at all. It's surrender in disguise. It didn't happen all at once. That's the most dangerous part about it. It creeps in, one small compromise at a time. You tell yourself it's nothing. You fold the towels her way, even though it makes no sense. You stop drinking coffee past 8 because her mother says it disrupts the energy flow in the house. You stop watching late-night documentaries because the sound carries through the vents. You start to disappear and no one notices, not even you. Not until you try to speak and realize you've forgotten the sound of your own voice. Helen didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her presence was enough to alter the temperature of any room. She had a talent for making suggestions that felt like ultimatums wrapped in velvet. "You're so good with your hands, Thomas. Maybe this weekend you could look at the gutter? It's been leaking since the storm." I didn't even remember agreeing, but Saturday morning, there I was on a ladder, wrench in hand, trying to fix a house that wasn't mine. Every task was framed as a favor, every favor became a habit, and every habit slowly rewrote the terms of my existence. At first, I thought Emily would eventually see it, that she'd notice how I was being slowly folded into her mother's world like another piece of antique furniture. But she didn't. Or worse, she did and chose not to say anything. I'd come home from 12-hour days trying to keep my company alive only to find a list on the counter in her handwriting. "Mom asked if you could take care of these, thank you." 3, with a smiley face, like as if that erased the weight behind it. Vacuuming the guest wing, reorganizing the tool shed, fixing a fence that only Helen claimed was broken. I tried laughing it off. I told myself it was temporary, that once we moved into our own place, things would be different. But that conversation never came up again. Every time I asked, Emily had a reason to delay. "It's not a good time financially, even though I was the one paying most of the bills. Mom's been stressed lately. The market's insane right now." I stopped asking. Not because I accepted it, but because I was tired of having to justify wanting a door that closed behind us. I noticed how little of me remained in the house. None of my books were on the shelves. My favorite chair was pushed into a corner of the sunroom that nobody used. Even the music that played in the evenings had changed. Gone were the jazz records we used to listen to in my old apartment. Now it was soft, ambient classical that Helen played during her guided meditation hour. Emily called it peaceful, but to me it felt like a funeral for my own identity. We weren't building a life together, we were assimilating into one already pre-designed. The intimacy between us started to dry up. At first it was subtle, fewer kisses that lingered, her hand no longer reached for mine at night. I'd wake up at 3 a.m. to an empty bed, find her downstairs scrolling through Pinterest boards with her mom, talking about curtain colors and feng shui like those were urgent matters at that hour. When I asked her if everything was okay, she said she was just tired. "You're always working, Thomas. I need connection too." That part hurt the most, because I was working for us, for a future she used to say she wanted. But now us meant something else, something I couldn't define anymore. One evening, after another long day at the office, I came home to find Helen sitting in my spot at the dining table. That seat had always been mine, not by rule, but by habit. That night, she sat there like she'd claimed it, and Emily said nothing. I stood there for a second, waiting for someone to acknowledge the shift. No one did. I sat across from them, in a different chair, trying not to let it bother me, but the metaphor burned in my head. I had been displaced in furniture and in function. It wasn't just the house, it was everything. My schedule, my autonomy, even my words. I began second-guessing myself constantly. If I said I wanted to eat out, Helen would make a comment about wasteful spending, and Emily would agree. If I brought up taking a weekend away, Helen would mention all the chores that still needed doing. And when I insisted, Emily would sigh and say, "But you always want to run away instead of fixing things here." As if here was sacred. As if here hadn't become a maze I couldn't escape. The worst part was the gaslighting. The way they made me feel like I was the one overreacting. That I was being too sensitive, too proud. That my discomfort was a sign of ego, not injury. Emily would say things like, "You always see the worst in people," when I brought up concerns, or "You're just not used to being part of a real family." That one stung like hell. Because maybe she was right. Maybe I wasn't. Maybe my childhood, full of silence and abandonment, had made me too eager to belong, too willing to surrender myself for a seat at a table that was never mine. I started staying at the office later. I told myself it was for work, but it wasn't. It was for air, for space, for the simple relief of not having to explain myself. My coworkers began noticing the change. My CTO pulled me aside and asked if everything was okay at home. I lied. I said I was just tired. But the truth is, I was unraveling, quietly, systematically, and no one, not even me, was doing a damn thing to stop it. The final straw, though, wasn't dramatic. It wasn't an argument or an outburst. It was a Tuesday night. I was sitting on the back patio alone, watching the wind move through the lemon trees Helen had planted, and I realized something terrifying. I hadn't laughed in months. Not really, not freely, not without worrying if someone in that house would find it inappropriate or out of place. That night, I stared into the dark and said it out loud for the first time. Not to anyone else, just to myself. "I'm not okay here." And the silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was damning. There's a strange kind of stillness that settles in a house when the people inside no longer see each other. Not out of absence, but out of erosion. Everything becomes muted. The greetings turn into nods. The laughter turns into forced smiles. And the silences? They stretch longer than they should, but nobody questions them anymore. That's how it was between me and Emily by the time it broke. A quiet war made of unfinished sentences and closed doors. I had just landed from Seoul. The trip was exhausting, high-stakes meetings, delays, client drama. I hadn't even told Emily I was coming home a day early. I guess a part of me wanted to surprise her, maybe even reconnect. Stupid in hindsight, but I was still holding on to something I couldn't name. The house was dim when I got there. Rain was tapping against the windows, soft and rhythmic, like it had been waiting to narrate a truth I wasn't ready to face. I stepped inside and dropped my bag by the front door. No one came to greet me. Just the smell of fresh candles and the faint clatter of voices coming from the dining room. At first, I thought it was just background noise, but then I heard my name. I stood in the hallway behind the wall. I didn't move. Something in me already knew I shouldn't be hearing what came next. But I listened. "You need to make him choose." Helen's voice, calm, clipped, always in control. "This isn't sustainable. He either steps up and commits to this family fully, or he steps out." There was a pause. "He won't just quit the company," Emily replied. "He says it's his life's work." Helen didn't even sigh. Then remind him that this life, the one you share, isn't a hobby. If he can't make us the priority, then maybe he's not built for family at all. I didn't hear what came after. My ears were ringing. My heartbeat was in my throat. The suitcase still in my hand felt heavier than it should. I stood there staring at the dark floor tiles, thinking, this is it. This is what I am to them, an obstacle, a burden, a man to be managed. I walked in without saying a word. The two of them looked up, startled, and for a second I saw it, the panic in Emily's eyes. But it was gone just as fast. She stood up and smiled, like everything was normal. Hey, you're back early. You didn't say... I didn't know I had to get it approved, I said. My voice was low, too even. Even I could hear the tension buried under it. Helen stood, unbothered. Thomas, we were just talking about some things that... Don't! I cut her off, looking at Emily. You knew I'd hear that conversation eventually, didn't you? Emily didn't answer right away. She bit her lip, then walked around the table. Look, it's not what you think. We're just trying to figure out what's best for us. Us? I repeated, laughing quietly. You mean you and your mother. That's not fair. No, I snapped. What's not fair is giving everything I have to this marriage and finding out I'm nothing more than a problem to solve, a project to manage. You don't talk to me. You talk about me? Helen stepped forward. You're being dramatic, Thomas. No one is attacking you. Funny, I said, still looking at Emily, because it feels a hell of a lot like I've been under siege in my own life for over a year. Emily's arms were crossed now, defensive, distant. You're always so quick to turn everything into an attack. Maybe if you listened instead of shutting down every time someone challenges you. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You call this challenging? I built a company from nothing. I've worked my ass off to give us a future. And the one thing I asked for was partnership. Not obedience, not silence, just partnership. But all I got was this. I gestured at the room, at the house, at everything that wasn't mine anymore. You think I don't support you, Emily said. But you've never really supported me either. You never understood how important this family is to me. No, I said. I understood perfectly. I just didn't realize that to be part of it, I had to erase myself. The words hung in the air like a slow-burning match. Helen said something after that, I don't remember what. I walked away, went upstairs, packed what I needed in silence. Emily followed me halfway through the hallway but didn't come inside. She didn't stop me, she didn't cry, she just watched. And that told me everything I needed to know. That night, I drove with no destination in mind. I ended up at a cheap hotel off the freeway, the kind with buzzing neon signs and polyester sheets. But the silence in that room, it was mine. I laid on that bed fully clothed, staring at the cracked ceiling, and I realized something terrifyingly liberating. I wasn't sad. I was empty. And in that emptiness, I finally felt the space I needed to begin again. We were scaling faster than projections. 3 new hires in a month. Partnerships closing within weeks. Our product, once a scrappy beta, was now being tested by enterprise clients. Laura wasn't just an investor anymore, she was a strategic co-builder. We challenged each other like equals, disagreed without drama, and never once lost sight of why we started. There were nights we'd work till 1 a.m. and sit on the rooftop after. Her boots up on the railing, sipping bad coffee, talking about the industry, about purpose, about the weight of second chances. She never once asked about Emily. She didn't need to. Everything I wasn't saying lived in the pauses between sentences, and she respected that. For the first time in years, I wasn't just building something, I was in it. Not to prove anything, not to earn approval, but because I believed in it. The people, the product, the path forward. I was present, alert, no longer chasing validation. And I wasn't afraid to lead. Not aggressively, not with ego, but with clarity. The board started noticing. Clients stayed longer on calls. My team came alive again. I was back. Not the old version, but the one that had been sharpened by failure and rebuilt by truth. Then came the audit. It started as a formality, routine compliance check. But within days, we were flagged for discrepancies, fiscal inconsistencies that didn't add up. At first, I thought it was an error, some clerical issue, but the tone of the investigators shifted quickly. They weren't just verifying reports, they were digging. Emails, transfers, old contracts. Within a week, rumors started. Whispers of misappropriated funds, potential fraud. Some of our smaller investors began to pull out. Clients paused contracts. I could feel the air in the office change, from excitement to uncertainty. Laura stayed calm. She asked for full access. She and our finance lead combed through every record, every transaction, every receipt. I didn't sleep that weekend. By Monday, we found it. A paper trail, deliberate, meticulously designed to mimic internal misreporting. Payments rerouted. Timelines shifted. Vendor documents altered. But it wasn't ours. It was planted. I knew who it was before Laura even said the name. Helen. It all clicked. Her need for control. Her obsession with image. Her access. She'd worked in corporate finance for years. The trail pointed toward a shell vendor one tied to a holding company that, when traced, linked back to an advisory firm her brother owned. It was subtle, professional, almost flawless. If Laura hadn't spotted a timestamp mismatch in an invoice footer, we might have missed it entirely. I sat in my office, staring at the report, hand frozen over the mouse. She had tried to destroy me. Not just take me down, but erase my reputation. Cripple my company, make me radioactive in the only world I had left. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the name listed as the anonymous whistleblower in the SEC report that triggered the audit. Michael, Emily's younger brother. I had helped him get his first job out of college. I had vouched for him when no one would. I had trusted him. Laura stood beside me, reading the same document. Her voice was low but steady. They want leverage, not justice. This isn't about money. It's personal. She was right. It wasn't about the company. It was about power. About control. About punishing me for walking away, for choosing myself, for daring to be free. We had a choice. Fight publicly or settle quietly and disappear. I looked at Laura. She didn't blink. If you stay silent, they win twice. And I had stayed silent long enough. We filed the first set of documents on a Wednesday. Quietly. Precisely. No press release, no noise. Just facts, affidavits, data trails, bank records. Everything meticulously arranged by Laura and our legal team. She moved through the legal strategy with surgical precision, unflinching. This wasn't her first time going up against a family-run empire trying to silence its black sheep. But this time, it was personal for both of us. Within 72 hours, word leaked. An independent tech blog picked it up. Then the bigger outlets. Then financial press. Headlines screamed conflict. Startup founder accuses ex-mother-in-law of corporate sabotage. Some thought it was fabricated, others dug deeper. Screenshots, leaked documents. The internet did what the internet does. It turned speculation into wildfire. But unlike before, I didn't feel exposed. I felt ready. Helen made her move fast. Press statements claiming I was mentally unstable, bitter over my failed marriage, accusing me of dragging her name for attention. Michael, coward that he was, backed her version. Said I'd emotionally manipulated the family. It stung, but not in the way it used to. I'd heard those lines before. Inside their house, around that dinner table. Gaslighting dressed as family loyalty. But this time, I wasn't alone, and I wasn't silent. Laura stepped forward not just as a partner, but as a witness. She went on record confirming our findings. Our board backed us. Clients who believed in the product stayed. One even offered their legal team pro bono. But what changed everything wasn't the law, it was the story. I gave one interview. Just one. Not to defend myself, but to explain what people never talk about. Control in the name of love. The slow erasure of agency. The way emotional abuse doesn't always show up in bruises or screaming matches, but in silence, guilt, subtle domination dressed as tradition. I told the world what it felt like to be applauded in boardrooms, but treated like a burden in your own home. To be told you're ungrateful for wanting space. To be called selfish for wanting independence. And something shifted. Messages flooded in. Men and women, professionals, parents, sons, daughters, all writing to say thank you. Some said it was the first time they saw themselves in someone else's story. Others said it gave them language for something they'd buried for years. Suddenly, this wasn't about Helen anymore. This wasn't even about me. It was about them. The quiet ones, the compliant ones, the high-functioning adults walking around with emotional bruises no one ever sees. We weren't fighting a legal war anymore. We were reclaiming narrative. Behind the scenes, Helen panicked. Her legal team scrambled. Once public sentiment turned, her options narrowed. Settling would be admitting guilt. Going to court meant discovery, exposure, more press. She tried one last play sending Emily. It was late evening when she showed up outside our building. No warning, no drama, just a knock, a familiar silhouette I hadn't seen in nearly a year. Laura wasn't there. I let Emily in. She didn't sit. Just stood in the middle of the room, eyes scanning the space like it was foreign. I didn't say anything. She finally broke the silence. "I didn't know she'd go that far," she said. "I thought it would scare you, not destroy you." I looked at her and didn't feel rage. I felt detachment, like I was watching someone I once dreamt with speak through the wrong mouth. "She didn't destroy me," I said. "She just reminded me who I never want to become." Emily's voice cracked. "This isn't how I wanted it to end." "It ended a long time ago," I replied. "You just didn't want to admit it." She left without asking for anything. No apology, no peace treaty, just silence again, but this time it was mine. The settlement came quietly. Helen's legal team folded the moment discovery began to scratch beneath the surface. Public opinion had turned, sponsors were pulling out of her projects, and media outlets no longer bought the polished image she'd spent decades curating. The damage was done, not just in the court, but in the court of perception. What had been a matriarch's empire now looked like an elaborate shell of control and appearances, built on silence and intimidation. Michael issued a private apology through his lawyer. I never read it. Emily disappeared from the headlines. No open letters, no interviews, just a quiet erasure like she'd been edited out of her own life. I didn't celebrate. There were no victory drinks, no champagne. Just a quiet morning 1 month later, where I opened my eyes and realized I no longer woke up with the weight of someone else's voice in my head. That was the real win. Laura stood by me through it all, not as a crutch, not as a savior, but as a mirror. She never tried to fix me. She simply stood next to the version of me that finally decided I was worth standing for. We didn't rush into declarations or timelines. There was no label, just clarity. We traveled together when we could, cooked on slow Sundays, argued over product features, and made up over street tacos. She challenged me, called me out when I slipped into old patterns. But she never made me feel small for struggling. She saw my flaws and didn't flinch. I began speaking at conferences, not just about product growth or startup culture, but about something deeper, something I'd once been ashamed to name. Emotional erasure. Psychological captivity masked as family. The invisible prisons built from loyalty and shame. I told my story without bitterness. Not because I'd forgotten, but because I no longer lived inside it. The first time I told it, I looked out and saw the eyes of men, grown, successful, powerful, glossed with recognition. That was when I knew this wasn't just about me. We live in a world where men are taught to absorb pain quietly, to endure, to stay. But endurance without truth isn't strength. It's slow death. I wasn't brave because I walked away. I was brave because I stopped lying to myself about who I was inside the life I built to please others. One evening, after a panel on silent suffering, a young man came up to me. He looked barely 30. He said, "My fiance's mother sounds like yours," and I thought I was crazy for hating being around her. He didn't ask me what to do. He just needed someone to say, "You're not broken for noticing something's wrong." I did. Emily reached out once, months later. An email. Short. She said she was in therapy, that she didn't understand what was happening until it was over. That she still wakes up sometimes, hearing the words I said the night I left. She didn't ask for anything, just said, "Thank you." I didn't respond, not out of cruelty, but because nothing needed to be said anymore. Some stories end without closure, and that's their closure. I never went back to the house, never drove by. That life is a country I once held a passport to, but it expired the day I chose myself. Now, my apartment isn't filled with expensive furniture. It doesn't look like something out of a catalog. But every object has a reason. Every wall has breath. There's music in the mornings, jazz, the old records I once buried. Laura hates some of them. I let her change the song. And she laughs when I fake protest. Sometimes, love is letting someone change the playlist without making it a metaphor for compromise. I no longer believe in perfect peace. But I believe in earned peace, the kind that comes from choosing discomfort over dishonesty, solitude over suffocation. Some people will never understand why I left what looked like a beautiful life. But I didn't leave beauty. I left performance. I left quiet control. I left the version of me who thought being tolerated was enough. This isn't a comeback story, it's a reclaiming. A reminder that you don't have to set yourself on fire to keep anyone warm. That love, without respect, is a leash. And silence, when weaponized, is louder than any scream. I live quietly now. Not hidden, just whole.